When my daughter got married, I never told her that my late brother had secretly left me a $90 million inheritance. Looking back, keeping that secret was the smartest decision I ever made. Because in the months that followed the wedding, I watched my son-in-law slowly reveal exactly who he was, and by the time my daughter showed up at my front door with her new husband, 2 police officers and a financial investigator, I was ready. They believed they were about to take control of my fortune. I quietly stepped aside and let them in, because I already knew something about my son-in-law that would soon cost him everything. Welcome to Dad's Revenge Stories, and thank you for choosing to spend your time here. Before I begin, where in the world are you watching from? Leave your city or country below. You would be amazed how far this community reaches. Like and subscribe if stories like this are what you came for. Note some elements of this story are fictional, crafted to bring the message to life. Names and places are coincidental, but the lesson waiting at the end of this is not. The garden had always been the best part of my mornings. I was 60 years old, retired from 38 years of structural engineering, and the greatest luxury I had discovered in this new chapter of my life was time. Time to kneel in the dirt at 6 in the morning. Time to press seeds into California soil with my bare hands and watch something grow from nothing. Time to drink my coffee while it was still hot, standing between the rows of tomatoes and the old rose bushes my wife Patricia had planted the year before she got sick. The house on Marengo Street in Pasadena had been ours for 31 years. 2 stories, pale yellow, siding a front porch that needed repainting every 4 years like clockwork. I knew every creaking floorboard, every window that stuck in the summer humidity, every hairline crack in the foundation that I had personally repaired twice with my own hands. This house was not just property. It was the physical evidence of a life Patricia and I had built together, nail by nail, argument by argument, laugh by laugh. She had been gone for 5 years now. Breast cancer, swift and merciless, the kind that gives you 8 months from diagnosis to goodbye. I still kept her reading glasses on the nightstand. I still bought the brand of orange marmalade she liked, even though I preferred strawberry jam. Some habits are not about logic. They are about the unbearable tenderness of continuing. My daughter Olivia was the only family I had left. She was 32, taught 3rd grade at a public elementary school in Silver Lake, and had her mother's laugh, that sudden, unguarded burst of sound that made strangers in restaurants turn and smile. For the 3 years after Patricia passed, Olivia had driven out to Pasadena every Sunday without fail. She would bring flowers from the farmer's market on Ivar, kick off her shoes at the door, and spend the afternoon sitting across from me at the kitchen table with her hands wrapped around a mug of tea, talking about everything and nothing. Those Sundays had kept me sane. I was deadheading the roses when my phone buzzed on the porch railing. The screen showed Olivia's name, and my chest lifted immediately, the way it always did when I saw it. I pulled off my garden gloves and picked up on the second ring. "Livy," I said, hearing the smile in my own voice. "You're calling early." "Hi, Dad." Her voice came through the speaker, and my hand tightened around the phone before my brain even registered why. Something was different. Olivia's voice was warm by nature. She was a 3rd grade teacher. Warmth was practically a professional requirement, but the voice on the line was careful, measured, like someone reading from a card held just out of frame. "Everything okay?" I asked. "Everything's fine," she said, and the words came just a half-second too quickly. "I just wanted to let you know that Ethan and I are planning to come by on Saturday. He wants to spend some time with you, get to know you better." I walked slowly to the porch steps and sat down. "That sounds nice," I said, keeping my voice easy and open. "I'll put something on the grill. You don't have to go to any trouble. It's no trouble. I'll make those cedar plank salmon patties your mother used to love." There was a pause on the line, not long, barely 2 seconds, but I felt it like a change in air pressure. "Sure, Dad," Olivia said. "That sounds great. We'll see you Saturday." She ended the call before I could sound goodbye. I sat there on the porch steps with the phone in my hand and the morning birds going about their business in the rose bushes. The call had lasted 1 minute and 40 seconds. In all the years Olivia had been calling me, I could not remember a single conversation under 5 minutes. We were talkers, her and I. We inherited it from Patricia, who believed that silence at a dinner table was a personal failure. "Everything all right over there?" I looked up. Margaret Porter, Maggie, as everyone on the block called her, was standing at the low fence between our properties, holding a pair of pruning shears and wearing a sun hat the color of a traffic cone. She was 58, recently retired after 30 years as a clerk for the Los Angeles family court system, and she had been my neighbor and Patricia's closest friend since 1997. She noticed things. It was a professional habit she had never managed to shake, and I had stopped being surprised by how little escaped her attention. "That was Olivia," I said. I heard the phone. Maggie set the shears on top of the fence post and crossed her arms. "You've got that look on your face." "What look?" "The one you get when a load-bearing wall isn't sitting right and you can't figure out why yet." I almost smiled at that. "She's bringing Ethan on Saturday." Maggie made a small sound that was not quite a word. She had met Ethan Carter twice, once at the engagement party Olivia had thrown at a rooftop restaurant in Los Feliz, and once at a neighborhood barbecue I had hosted in July. Both times she had been perfectly pleasant to him and perfectly quiet to me afterward. Maggie's silence on the subject of a person was louder than most people's opinions. "You want company Saturday?" she asked. "I think I need to handle this one on my own," I said. She nodded once, picked up her shears, and went back to her roses. Ethan Carter arrived at my door that Saturday at 11 in the morning, 45 minutes before he had said they would come. He was 36, broad-shouldered, with the kind of easy confidence that fills a room without announcing itself. He worked as an investment consultant out of an office in Century City, or so he said, and he had the handshake of a man who had practiced it. Firm, held exactly 1 second longer than necessary, eyes locked on yours. "Daniel," he said, smiling like we were old friends reuniting after years apart. "Great to be here. This neighborhood is incredible. These lots must be worth a fortune." "Good to see you, Ethan," I said, and stepped back to let them in. Olivia came in behind him and hugged me, a real hug, her arms tight around my shoulders, her face pressed briefly against my cheek. I felt the tension in her body, the way you feel a crack in a wall through your palm. Something was wound too tight. I squeezed her back and didn't say anything about it. We ate lunch on the back porch. I had made the cedar plank salmon patties, a green salad, and a lemon tart I'd picked up from the Portuguese bakery on Colorado Boulevard. Ethan complimented everything twice each. He asked about the neighborhood's property values. He asked whether I had a financial advisor managing my retirement accounts. He asked whether I'd considered downsizing now that it was just me in the house. Each question landed lightly wrapped in the language of concern, and each one made the back of my neck prickle with something I couldn't yet name. Olivia was quieter than I had ever seen her at my table. She ate, carefully refilled everyone's water glasses twice, and laughed at exactly the right moments, but the laugh didn't reach her eyes the way it used to. The laugh that had been her mother's laugh seemed to have been packed away somewhere, replaced by a performance of it. After lunch, Ethan asked if he could use the bathroom, and I directed him to the one down the hall. While he was gone, I looked at my daughter across the porch table. Her hands were wrapped around her water glass, and her eyes were following a hummingbird that had appeared at the feeder by the fence. "Livy," I said quietly, "are you happy?" She turned to look at me, And for one unguarded moment I saw something flicker across her face, something raw and complicated and very quickly controlled. Then she smiled. "Of course I am Dad," she said. "Why would you ask that?" I heard the bathroom door open down the hall, and the moment closed like a book. Later, as they were leaving, I walked them to the front door. Ethan stepped out onto the porch ahead of Olivia to check his phone, and I touched my daughter's arm lightly to hold her back for just a second. "You can always call me," I said. "Anytime. For anything." Her eyes went glassy for just a moment, a shine of something she was working hard to hold back, and then she blinked and it was gone. "I know, Dad," she said. "I love you." She followed her husband down the front walk. I stood in the doorway and watched them reach the car. Ethan opened the passenger door for Olivia with the practiced ease of a man who understood the value of being observed. Then he walked around to the driver's side, and as he opened his own door, he turned back and looked at the house one more time. Not at me. At the house. His gaze moved slowly across the roofline, the porch columns, the mature oak tree in the front yard. It was the look of a man taking measurements. That night, I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee gone cold and thought about the things Ethan Carter had asked me over lunch. Not the words, the pattern. 38 years of structural engineering had taught me that the most important thing about any structure is never the surface. It is always what lies beneath the weight being carried, the stresses being hidden, the hairline fractures that appear long before the collapse. I picked up my phone and scrolled to a number I had not called in several months. Victor Hale answered on the second ring. "Daniel," he said, "I was actually thinking about calling you." "Were you?" I said. "There's something I think you need to know." His voice was careful in the way that careful voices are when the news is not good. "Can you come to the office this week?" I looked out the kitchen window at the dark garden, at the shapes of Patricia's rose bushes against the night sky. "Tuesday," I said. "I'll be there Tuesday morning." Victor Hale's office on the 12th floor of a Wilshire Boulevard high-rise had the kind of view that made you feel like the city belonged to you, or at least like it could if you were careful enough with the right decisions at the right moments. I had been here twice before, once when my brother Michael first introduced me to Victor 7 years ago, and once 14 months ago when I sat in this same leather chair and listened to a man I had never expected to outlive tell me what he had left behind. Victor was 54, lean and deliberate, in the way that people who manage other people's fortunes tend to be. He did not waste words. He did not waste gestures. He set a single manila folder on the glass desk between us and placed both hands flat on top of it before he spoke. "Before I get into this," he said, "I need to ask you something directly. In the past 6 months, has anyone in your immediate circle asked you specific questions about your financial holdings, your assets, your property, your plans for the estate?" My throat tightened. I thought about Ethan Carter sitting across from me at my own porch table, asking about property values with a smile so smooth it left no fingerprints. "Yes," I said. "My son-in-law." Victor nodded slowly, like a man confirming something he had already suspected. He opened the folder. But before he could speak, my mind pulled me backward the way it does sometimes, without asking permission, to a Saturday in April, 6 months earlier, when the sky over Beverly Hills was the particular shade of blue that only exists in Southern California in the spring. The wedding had been Olivia's dream, and I had paid for it without hesitation. Not because I had money to spare on a retired engineer's pension, but because Patricia had talked about Olivia's wedding day since our daughter was 7 years old, and Patricia was not here to see it, and the least I could do was make sure it was everything she had imagined. The venue was a garden restaurant on North Cannon Drive with bougainvillea climbing every wall and string lights overhead, that turned the whole evening amber. Olivia had worn Patricia's pearl earrings. When she walked toward the altar and caught my eye, she pressed her lips together, the way she always did when she was fighting back tears, and my chest cracked open so wide I had to look up at the lights for a moment to collect myself. She was radiant. She was happy. I told myself that was enough. Ethan had been charming all evening. He thanked the caterers by name. He danced with his new mother-in-law's empty chair, a gesture Olivia had suggested, and which made half the room reach for their tissues. He gave a toast that was funny and warm, and made everyone feel like they were witnessing something real. It was during the dinner hour when the dancing had started, and the older guests had claimed the quieter tables near the garden wall that he found me. Daniel. He sat down beside me with 2 glasses of champagne, handing me one with the easy familiarity of a man who had decided we were already close. I feel like we haven't had a real chance to talk tonight. It's been a busy evening, I said. It really has. He clinked his glass against mine and took a slow sip, his eyes moving across the courtyard with the satisfied expression of a man surveying an investment. Beautiful venue. These properties in this part of Beverly Hills, the land value alone must be staggering. I wouldn't know, I said pleasantly. I'm more of a Pasadena man myself. His eyes returned to me with a warmth that didn't quite reach their center. Speaking of Pasadena, Olivia mentioned the house has been in the family a long time. 30 years. 31. Incredible. That neighborhood has appreciated significantly. You must have built up substantial equity. He paused, turning the champagne glass slowly in his fingers. I hope you have someone helping you manage all of that. A financial advisor, an estate planner. It can get complicated, especially after... He stopped, and his expression shifted into something carefully sympathetic. After losing a spouse, the financial picture changes so much. I looked at my daughter on the dance floor. She was laughing at something her maid of honor had said. Her head thrown back, and for a moment she looked exactly like Patricia at 32. I have people I trust, I said, and changed the subject. What Ethan did not know, what no one at that wedding knew except for Victor Hale and the attorneys who had drafted the paperwork, was that 6 months before that evening, my brother Michael had died of a heart attack in his home in Marine County, and he had left me everything. Michael Brooks had been 58 years old and had built a logistics empire from nothing, the way our father had always said one of us would, and neither of us quite believed. He had never married. He had no children. He lived quietly and worked constantly and accumulated wealth with the focused patience of a man who understood that money was not the destination but the instrument. 3 weeks after his death, I sat across from Victor Hale for the first time as a client, rather than a guest, and Victor had laid out the contents of the trust with the steady precision of a surgeon. $40 million in cash and treasury bonds, $25 million in equity shares of Michael's logistics company, $15 million in commercial real estate holdings across Northern California, $10 million in diversified investment accounts, $90 million in my name, in a blind trust managed entirely by Victor until I chose to activate it. I had gripped the arms of the chair and focused very carefully on breathing. There are conditions, Victor had said, sliding a sealed envelope across the desk. Michael was very specific. Inside the envelope was a letter in Michael's handwriting, tight and precise the way he had always written even as a boy. Daniel, if you are reading this, then I am gone and you are sitting across from Victor, trying not to look as overwhelmed as you feel. Don't worry. That's the right reaction. I need you to keep this completely private for 2 years from the date of my death. Tell no one. Not Olivia. Not anyone. I know that feels wrong, but I need you to trust me on this. Money doesn't change people, brother. It only shows you who they already are. I love you. I'm sorry I didn't call more. I had folded the letter carefully and put it in my breast pocket and driven home to Pasadena and sat in Patricia's garden until it was dark. Now, 14 months later, Victor opened his folder and looked at me across the glass desk with an expression I recognized from courtrooms and job sites, the look of a man about to deliver information that cannot be taken back once it is spoken. The 2-year confidentiality window closes in 30 days, Daniel, he said. Whatever is going to happen, it is already in motion. And I think you need to understand that before it reaches you. My hands were steady on the arms of the chair. My voice, when it came, was steady too. But somewhere behind my sternum, something had begun to ache, with a slow, deep throb, the specific pain of a man who is starting to understand that the thing he feared most has already begun. Tell me everything, I said. Victor took a breath. Ethan Carter did not meet your daughter by accident. The ache behind my sternum sharpened into something colder. Brandon Mercer, Victor continued, worked as a logistics manager for Michael's company for 4 years. He knew there was significant wealth in the Brooks family. He knew it was going to pass to you. Victor's voice remained level, but his eyes were direct and unsparing. Michael discovered a troubling connection between Brandon and a man named Ethan Carter in the final months of his life. He didn't have time to investigate fully, but he warned me. He told me if that name ever comes up in connection with your family, treat it as a 5-alarm fire. The room felt very quiet. Outside the 12th floor windows, Wilshire Boulevard moved with its usual indifferent efficiency. Cars, buses, the ordinary machinery of a city that did not care about the specific gravity of what was happening in this room. I thought about Ethan's hand on the small of Olivia's back at the wedding, the practiced warmth of his toast, the way his eyes had moved across my house on Saturday like he was reading a blueprint. He knew, I said. My voice came out lower than I intended, rougher. He knew before he ever introduced himself to my daughter. We believe so, Victor said quietly. I pressed my back against the chair and stared at the ceiling for a long moment, jaw clenched so tight I could feel it in my temples. The pain behind my sternum had spread outward now, filling my chest, because this was not the pain of betrayal by a stranger. This was something worse. This was the pain of watching something precious be handled by someone who had only ever seen it as a transaction. My daughter, my Olivia, who had her mother's laugh and her grandfather's stubbornness, and had cried at the kitchen table when her 3rd-grade class gave her a handmade card at Christmas. She had been a target before she had ever been a bride. What do I do? My voice cracked on the last word, just slightly, just enough. I cleared my throat and tried again. Victor, what do I do now? Victor reached across the desk and turned to the next page in the folder. His expression was steady and grave, and deeply, genuinely sorry. There's more, he said, and it is worse. I counted the days, the way a man counts the days after a doctor's appointment, where the news was not good, not obsessively, but with a quiet, continuous awareness that sat behind everything else I did. 93 days since Olivia had called me first. Every conversation we'd had in those 3 months had started the same way, my thumb on her name, the phone ringing twice, 3 times, and then her voice coming through careful and measured, like a woman choosing each word from a list someone else had prepared. I'm fine, Dad. Everything's good. Ethan says hi. She used to call me to tell me about a student who had learned to read that week. She used to call me from the grocery store because she couldn't remember whether I liked the chunky or the smooth peanut butter. She used to call me for no reason at all, which was the best reason of every kind. Now she called me back, and only when I called first. I was pulling weeds along the garden fence on a Wednesday afternoon When Maggie appeared at the property line, her pruning shears in one hand, and a look on her face that told me she had been working up to saying something for a while. "I need to tell you something," she said, "and I want you to hear it the way I mean it, which is carefully." I straightened up and brushed the dirt from my knees. "Go ahead." 3 weeks ago on a Thursday, I wrote it down, 4:17 in the afternoon, Ethan sat in a car outside your house for 52 minutes. She said it the way she used to cite court records. Precise. Unapologetic. He didn't knock. He didn't get out. He just sat there and watched the house. I noted the time and the plate number. Force of habit from 30 years in family court. My stomach dropped about 6 inches. "He was here on a Thursday," I said. "Olivia was at school." "I know," Maggie said. "That's why I wrote it down." I stared at the fence post between us. The wood grain blurred slightly. I blinked hard and it came back into focus. "There's something else," Maggie said, her voice gentling just slightly. "About 2 months ago he came to my door. Said he was checking in on neighbors being friendly. Asked me whether you seemed forgetful lately. Whether you ever left the stove on. Whether I'd noticed you behaving," her word was erratically. She said the word like it tasted wrong. I told him no because the answer is no. But Daniel, that's not a friendly question. That's a man building something. The ache I had been carrying since Victor's office expanded in my chest until I had to breathe deliberately to keep my voice even. "He's collecting information," I said. "That's what it looks like to me." Maggie set her shears on top of the fence post and crossed her arms. "I clerked family court for 3 decades. I watched people do exactly this: ask the neighbors, document the behavior, build a case. They don't come for you directly. They come for the people around you first." I thought about Olivia signing something she hadn't fully read. I thought about her voice on the phone, careful, measured, someone else's words in her mouth. Then my phone rang. I looked at the screen. "Olivia." I answered immediately, and before I could even say her name, I heard something in the background. A door footsteps, and then Ethan's voice, smooth and close. "Hey, who are you calling?" And Olivia's voice suddenly higher, tighter. Just my dad. I was going to..." And then the sound changed, muffled like a hand over the receiver. And 30 seconds later, Olivia came back on the line with that careful, measured voice locked back into place. "Sorry, Dad," she said. "I'll call you tomorrow, okay?" The line went dead. I stood in the garden with the phone in my hand, and my heart hammering against my ribs with a specific sickening fury. Not the loud kind of fury, not the kind that makes you shout, but the quiet kind that settles in the bones and does not leave. My daughter had tried to call me, and someone had stopped her. I dialed Victor. He picked up on the first ring. "I need to move faster than 30 days, I said. "The drive from Pasadena to Beverly Hills on the 110 freeway takes about 30 minutes on a good morning." That morning, with the October sun cutting low and flat across the windshield, and the radio off because I could not tolerate noise, it felt like 30 minutes inside my own skull, nothing to look at, but the road ahead, and the things Victor had said the day before, turning over and over like stones in a tumbler. Ethan Carter did not meet your daughter by accident. I had not slept. I had sat in Patricia's garden until 2 in the morning, and then I had gone inside and sat at the kitchen table, and somewhere around 4 I had put my head down on my folded arms and drifted into something that was not quite sleep and not quite waking, full of half-formed images I could not hold on to. Victor was already at his desk when I arrived. No pleasantries. He simply gestured to the chair across from him and opened a second folder thicker than the first and began. "Brandon Mercer," he said. 40 years old. He worked as a senior logistics manager for Michael's company for 4 years until Michael let him go 18 months before his death. Victor turned the folder so I could see the photograph clipped to the first page. A broad face, light eyes, the kind of forgettable handsomeness that photographs well. Michael discovered that Brandon had been sharing internal company information with outside parties. Nothing that rose to the level of a criminal case at the time, but enough that Michael removed him immediately and flagged his name in our internal records. Michael fired him, I said. Quietly. No lawsuit, no public record. Michael preferred to handle things without noise. Victor's expression tightened slightly. In hindsight, that may have been a mistake, because Brandon walked away with enough information to be dangerous. What kind of information? He knew the approximate scale of Michael's holdings. He knew Michael had no spouse, no children, and one surviving family member. Victor looked at me steadily. He knew that when Michael died, everything would go to his brother. The word brother landed in the room like something dropped from a height. He knew about me, I said. He knew about you. And approximately 14 months before Michael passed, Brandon Mercer and Ethan Carter began appearing in the same financial circles. Private investment events. Networking dinners in West Hollywood. They were not casual acquaintances. Victor slid a second page across the desk, a printed list of dates and venues. We believe Brandon told Ethan exactly what he knew, the size of the estate, the family structure, the likely timeline of inheritance. I stared at the list of dates. My eyes moved over them without really reading them because my brain was doing something else entirely. It was rebuilding the last 2 years of my daughter's life from the beginning, replacing the story I had believed with this one, and the replacement felt like having a floor give way beneath me. Olivia, I said. My voice came out rough, scraped raw. He researched her before he ever spoke to her. We believe he identified her as the access point, yes. Victor's voice was quiet and entirely without softness, not because he was unkind, but because he understood that I needed the truth more than I needed comfort. There was a charity event in Santa Monica, a literacy foundation, benefit the kind Olivia attends regularly because of her work in education. Ethan was there. We do not think that was a coincidence. I pressed my hand flat against the desk. The glass was cool under my palm. I focused on that, the specific temperature of the glass, the solidity of it, because if I did not focus on something physical and immediate, I was going to come apart in a way that would not be useful to anyone. My daughter had walked into that room in Santa Monica thinking she was going to a fundraiser for children's literacy. And someone had been waiting for her. Why didn't Michael tell me? The question came out before I could stop it, and it came out with more pain in it than I intended. Victor was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice had shifted, still precise, but carrying something careful in it, something almost tender. Because Michael found out very late. He was sick by then, though he hadn't told you yet. He flagged Ethan's name with me and told me to watch for it. He said, Victor paused, glanced down at a handwritten note in the corner of the folder. He said, if that name ever comes up in connection with Daniel's family, treat it as a 5-alarm fire. Those were his exact words. My throat locked up so completely that I had to swallow twice before I could speak. Michael had known. Michael, in the last months of his life, sick and frightened, and not telling me any of it, had still been trying to protect me. He didn't want me to worry, I said, and my voice broke on the last word, split clean down the middle, the way old wood splits all at once. Victor did not look away. He did not offer me a tissue or a platitude or any of the things people reach for when another person's grief becomes visible in a room. He simply waited with the quiet dignity of a man who understood that some pain needs a moment before it can be moved through. I cleared my throat, pressed the heels of my hands against my eyes for 3 seconds. Then I dropped my hands and looked at him. "What does Ethan actually know?" I asked. "About the trust. About you." "That is the one thing working in our favor," Victor said, and for the first time that morning something that was almost relief entered his voice. Michael was meticulous about compartmentalization. Brandon knew there was a significant estate. He knew the approximate value. But Michael structured the trust so that no single person inside the company had complete information. Brandon never knew my name. He never knew the trust's structure. He knew there was money, he did not know where it was held, who managed it, or how to access it. So Ethan is operating blind, I said. Ethan knows the prize exists, Victor said. He does not know it has a guardian. I sat back in the chair and let out a long, slow breath, the kind that carries something with it when it leaves. Outside the window, Wilshire Boulevard moved in its usual indifferent morning rhythm. Somewhere down there in an office in Century City, a man who had planned this for over a year was sitting at his desk, believing he was winning. "There's more," I said. It was not a question. Victor turned to the next page in the folder. "He filed paperwork with the Los Angeles Superior Court 3 days ago," he said. "Daniel Ethan is trying to have you declared financially incompetent. The petition was filed 3 days ago. Once you are formally served, you will have 30 days to respond, and service could come any day now, and he has already convinced Olivia to sign the petition." The glass under my palm felt very cold. "She signed it," I said. "She signed it," Victor confirmed. "She believes she is protecting you." I sat in my car in the driveway for 11 minutes after I got home from Beverly Hills. I know it was 11 minutes because I watched the dashboard clock change twice and did not move either time. The engine was off. The street was quiet in the way that Pasadena residential streets are quiet on weekday mornings. A dog somewhere, a leaf blower 2 blocks over. The specific suburban silence of a neighborhood where most people have already left for work. I needed those 11 minutes. I needed to sit with what Victor had told me before I brought it inside the house, because some information changes the air of a room permanently once you speak it out loud, and I was not ready for that yet. She signed it. She believes she is protecting you. Olivia had put her name on a legal document that could strip me of the right to make my own financial decisions. She had done it because her husband had looked her in the eye and told her it was an act of love. And she had believed him because she was a 3rd-grade teacher from Silver Lake who had inherited her mother's instinct to trust the people she loved, and she had loved this man, and he had used that love like a tool. I got out of the car. I went inside. I called Victor. "Walk me through exactly what he filed," I said without preamble. "I need to understand every piece of it." Victor's voice was measured and clear, the way it always was when he was delivering information that required precision. "In California, a conservatorship of the estate is governed by the probate code starting at Section 1800. It allows a court to appoint a conservator, a person with legal authority to manage another individual's financial affairs, when that individual is determined to be substantially unable to manage their own finances due to cognitive impairment, mental illness, or similar incapacity. And Ethan filed this petition claiming I have cognitive impairment," I said. "The petition was filed in Olivia's name with Ethan listed as the supporting party," Victor said carefully. "But yes, the grounds cited are that you exhibit signs of cognitive decline that put your assets at risk. To support that claim, he has submitted a psychiatric evaluation." My hand tightened on the phone. "From whom?" "A private practice psychologist in Encino, Dr. Raymond Thal. He charges significant fees for what our attorneys describe as remarkably convenient diagnoses." Victor's voice carried a precise, controlled disgust. The evaluation was conducted without a direct examination of you. It is based entirely on third-party interviews and written observations. He never examined me, I said flatly. A doctor filed a report about my mental state without ever being in the same room as me. Correct. Under California law, a conservatorship petition can be initiated with a supporting declaration. It does not require a court-ordered examination until the hearing itself. Ethan is using that window. Victor paused. The third-party interviews he submitted include statements from two individuals who described observing behavior consistent with cognitive decline, leaving appliances running, forgetting appointments, appearing confused in conversation. My jaw clenched so hard I felt it in my back teeth. Those statements are fabricated, almost certainly. But fabricated statements in a civil petition are difficult to disprove quickly, which is precisely why this strategy is effective. Another pause. Daniel, if this petition succeeds and without a response it has a reasonable chance of succeeding, the court will appoint a conservator of your estate. Given that Ethan is the petitioner's husband and the listed supporting party, his attorneys will argue he is the logical choice. He would control everything, I said. The house, the accounts, the trust. Everything, Victor confirmed. Legally, with court authorization, without needing your signature on a single document. I stood at the kitchen window and looked out at Patricia's rose bushes. They needed pruning. I had been meaning to get to them for 2 weeks. It struck me in a way that was almost funny, and not funny at all, that a man could be in the process of losing everything he had spent his life building and still notice that the roses needed pruning. What do I need to do? I asked. You need an attorney. Not a general practice attorney, a probate litigator with conservatorship defense experience. Michael left you a contact. Victor's voice shifted slightly. He told me at the time we finalized the trust that he hoped you would never need it. He said, and I am quoting him, "For when Daniel needs a real fight, not just a real lawyer." I pulled open the kitchen drawer where I kept the documents from Victor's original package. Under the trust summary, the investment schedules, the property records, there was a single index card in Michael's handwriting with a name and a phone number. I stared at it for a long moment. My brother had known. Not the specifics, not Ethan's name, not the conservatorship scheme. But he had known the shape of what might come. He had prepared for it the way a structural engineer prepares for seismic load, not by predicting the exact earthquake, but by building the foundation to survive one. I was still standing at the counter with the index card in my hand when I heard the mail slot in the front door open and close with its familiar metallic click. I walked down the hall and picked up the small stack of envelopes from the floor. Electric bill, a catalog I had never subscribed to, and a large ivory envelope with the seal of the Los Angeles Superior Court printed in the upper left corner. My name was typed on the front, with the kind of impersonal precision that bureaucratic machinery uses when it is about to alter the course of a life. I opened it standing in the hallway. The language was formal and dense, but the meaning was clear enough. I had been named as the respondent in a conservatorship proceeding. A hearing had been scheduled. I had 30 days to respond through legal counsel or appear in person, beginning from the date stamped on the document in my hand. At the bottom of the page in the section marked Petitioner was my daughter's name, Olivia Brooks Carter. The paper trembled slightly in my hands, not because my hands were shaking, but because I was breathing too hard and could not immediately stop. I pressed my back against the hallway wall and stared at the ceiling and breathed through it the way I had learned to breathe through bad news over 60 years of a life that had contained its share of it. Then I went to the kitchen, picked up the index card Michael had left me, and dialed the number. It rang twice. Harrington and Associates, a woman's voice said. My name is Daniel Brooks, I said. Michael Brooks was my brother. He left me this number. I need to speak with someone today, specifically about a conservatorship defense. A brief pause. Then, please hold, Mr. Brooks. I'm going to connect you with Claire Sutton. She handles exactly this. I held the court summons in one hand and Michael's index card in the other, and waited with the particular stillness of a man who has just decided that he is done being afraid and has not yet decided what comes next. 6:45 in the morning and I was already dressed. I had been awake since 4, not the anxious, restless kind of awake, but the sharp, clear kind that comes when a part of your brain has been working through the night and has finally arrived somewhere. I had made coffee. I had read through the documents Victor had sent to my secure email at midnight. I had sat at Patricia's kitchen table with a yellow legal pad and written down everything I knew and everything I needed to know in 2 columns, the way I used to organize structural assessments before a major project. When I heard the cars pull up outside at 6:43, I was not surprised. I looked through the front window before I opened the door. 2 police cruisers, a dark sedan, and on my front porch, Ethan Carter in a charcoal suit that had probably cost more than my first car, standing with the careful posture of a man performing concern for an audience. Olivia stood 1 step behind him. 1 step. She was wearing her gray cardigan, the one she had owned since graduate school, the one she wore when she was cold or frightened, or both. Her arms were crossed tight over her chest, and her eyes were fixed on the welcome mat with an intensity that suggested she was reading it very carefully. She did not look up when I opened the door. "Daniel." Ethan's voice was warm and weighted with theatrical worry. "I'm so sorry about this. We just want to make sure you're being looked after." "Good morning, Ethan," I said. "Come in, all of you." I stepped back and held the door open. The 2 uniformed officers exchanged a brief glance. They had expected resistance or tears or the particular defensive fury of a man who feels cornered. What they got was a retired engineer in pressed slacks offering to hang up their jackets. The 4th person through the door was a woman I had not seen before. She was in her mid-40s, compact and precise in a dark blazer, with the kind of watchful stillness that belongs to people who have spent years in rooms where the truth is hiding somewhere, and their job is to find it. "Mr. Brooks," she said, producing a badge with a practiced motion. "Detective Rosa Navarro, Financial Crimes Unit. When a conservatorship petition involves allegations of financial mismanagement, we sometimes coordinate with the filing to assess whether there are broader concerns. I'm here in that capacity." "Thank you for coming, Detective," I said. "Can I offer anyone coffee?" Ethan blinked. He had not planned for coffee. I made a full pot. I set out mugs. I sat at the kitchen table while one of the officers walked through the house, and Ethan hovered near the doorway, explaining to Rosa in the practiced language of a man who had rehearsed the extent of his concerns about my financial management. He used the words vulnerable and confused, and at risk with the smooth frequency of someone who had been coached. Rosa sat across from me at the kitchen table. She had not touched her coffee. She was watching me the way I had watched load-bearing structures on job sites, looking for the thing that was actually holding everything up. After several minutes, she leaned forward slightly and lowered her voice. "Mr. Brooks, would you prefer to speak privately?" I looked at her directly. Her eyes were dark and entirely unreadable, which I had come to understand was not the same thing as empty. "Detective," I said, keeping my voice low and perfectly level, "I think you're investigating the wrong person." Something shifted in her expression, not surprise, recognition. She reached into her jacket pocket, produced a small notepad, and wrote something down without breaking eye contact with me. Then she closed the notepad and stood up. Across the kitchen, Ethan was still talking. He had not noticed the exchange. He was too busy performing. As everyone gathered near the front door to leave, I spoke one word. "Olivia." She flinched like I had touched a bruise. Slowly, she raised her eyes to mine, and what I saw there hit me somewhere below the sternum and spread outward like cold water. It was not anger. It was not defiance. It was the raw, swimming look of someone who is drowning and has just spotted something solid, but does not know whether they are allowed to reach for it. "I love you," I said quietly. Just that. Her lips pressed together. Her chin moved once the smallest possible nod. Then Ethan touched her elbow, and she followed him out the door. I stood in the hallway until the cars pulled away. Then I went to the kitchen, picked up my coffee, and found that my hand was not entirely steady. 20 minutes later, my phone buzzed on the counter. An unknown number. A text message, 3 lines. "Mr. Brooks, my name is Rosa Navarro. I think we need to talk. Not about you. Are you available this morning?" I set down my coffee cup, typed 2 letters, and hit send. Yes. The place Rosa had chosen was a small Armenian bakery on the corner of Lake and Cordova, the kind of establishment that has been in the same family for 20 years and does not need a sign because everyone who needs to find it already knows where it is. I arrived 8 minutes early and took the corner table facing the door with my back to the wall. 38 years of walking job sites had given me the habit of always knowing where the exits were. I ordered black coffee and a piece of string cheese borek that I did not particularly want, but felt I should buy in exchange for occupying the table. The coffee came in a small glass cup on a saucer. It was very strong and very good, and I wrapped both hands around it and waited. Rosa came through the door at exactly the time she had said she would. She was in the same dark blazer from this morning, but she had taken off the badge and clipped it to her belt. Instead, a small, deliberate shift from official to unofficial that I noticed and appreciated. She ordered at the counter, paid cash, and came to the table with an espresso and the particular focused energy of someone who has already decided what they are going to say and is simply waiting for the right moment to say it. She sat down. She did not open with pleasantries. 8 months ago, she said, a 63-year-old retired teacher in Culver City lost her life savings, $240,000. She had invested it through a private wealth management firm that turned out to be a shell, no registered assets, no licensed advisors, no regulatory filings. The money went into an operating account and disappeared. Rosa wrapped her hands around her espresso cup, mirroring me without seeming to notice it. That firm was linked to a holding company in Delaware. That holding company shared a registered agent with 2 other entities. One of those entities listed Ethan Carter as a director. I set my coffee down. "He took a retired teacher's savings," I said. "She was one of 11, Rosa said. "The ones we know about. Total losses across the group approximately $2.3 million. Most of them were referred by someone they trusted. A neighbor, a church contact, a colleague." Her jaw tightened slightly. "They were told it was a conservative, low-risk investment. They were sent quarterly statements showing steady returns. The statements were fabricated." My stomach turned over slowly, the way it does when you find a structural failure that has been hidden a long time. "He's been running this for years." "At minimum 3, Rosa said. "Possibly longer under different entity names." She looked at me directly, and the watchfulness in her eyes had sharpened into something that was almost urgency. "The problem is proof. I know what Ethan Carter is. I have known for 8 months. But knowing and proving in a federal court are 2 entirely different things. His structure is designed to be difficult to trace layers of entities, nominee directors' accounts in multiple jurisdictions." She paused. "What I have been missing is a direct, traceable transaction. Money going from a specific source through a specific account to a specific offshore destination. Something concrete enough to take to a federal prosecutor." "And you think I'm connected to that transaction?" I said. I think your daughter's account might be, Rosa said. She said it carefully and without accusation, watching my face the way doctors watch patients when they deliver news. 3 days ago, a transfer of $230,000 hit an account registered to Olivia Brooks Carter. The transfer originated from one of Ethan's operating entities. We believe it is moving toward an offshore account in the Cayman Islands. But the intermediate step, the account in Olivia's name, is the link we have not had before. The borek on my plate sat untouched. The bakery smelled of butter and cardamom, and the particular warmth of an oven that has been running since 5 in the morning, and I sat in the middle of all that ordinary comfort, and felt the cold spread through my chest, the way it does when the thing you feared most turns out to be exactly as bad as you feared. She doesn't know, I said. It was not a question. Everything I have seen suggests she has no knowledge of the source or purpose of the funds, Rosa said. But Daniel, it was the first time she had used my first name, and the shift in register was deliberate. If we move on Ethan before Olivia's account is properly documented, and her status as a victim is established, a federal system will flag that account automatically. She could be pulled into this as a subject rather than a witness. And untangling that once it happens takes time that she may not have. I pressed my palm flat on the table. The wood was warm from the morning light coming through the window, and I focused on that warmth and breathed through the tightness in my chest and made myself think clearly the way I had always made myself think clearly on job sites when something had gone wrong and people were looking to me for the next decision. "What do you need from me?" I asked. Rosa leaned forward slightly. "I need you to tell me everything. Michael, the trust, Victor Hale, Brandon Mercer, all of it. Because I think the piece I have been missing for 8 months is sitting right across this table from me." So I told her. I talked for 22 minutes without stopping. I told her about Michael's death and the blind trust and the 2-year confidentiality condition that was now 30 days from expiring. I told her about Victor's file on Brandon Mercer and the Santa Monica charity event and the conservatorship petition with Olivia's name on it. I told her about Ethan sitting in a car outside my house for 52 minutes on a Thursday afternoon while my daughter was at work teaching 8-year-olds how to read. Rosa listened without writing anything down. When she had sat down, she had placed her phone face up on the table and said briefly, "I'm recording for my notes, standard procedure." I had nodded. She had moved on before I fully registered it, which was, I suspected, exactly how she intended it. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Not the passive quiet of someone processing, but the active quiet of someone rearranging a very large puzzle and finding that the pieces are finally going where they are supposed to go. "You just gave me the last piece I've been missing for 8 months," she said. "Then let's make sure we use it correctly," I said. "My daughter's name stays clean. That is not negotiable." Rosa looked at me with something that might, in different lighting, have been called respect. "Agreed," she said. "Here is what we do." She reached into her jacket pocket, produced a small folded card, and slid it across the table. On it was a number I did not recognize and a single word, Victor. "Call him tonight," she said. "Tell him we are coordinating, and tell him I need everything he has on Brandon Mercer by tomorrow morning." She stood, dropped a $5 bill on the table for the espresso, and buttoned her blazer. "One more thing," she said, pausing at the edge of the table. "Don't let Ethan see you thinking. People like him read preparation the same way they read fear as information. Give him nothing to read." She walked out. The bell above the door rang once, and then the bakery was quiet again, warm and smelling of cardamom, and I sat there with Rosa's card in my hand and the cold certainty in my chest, slowly, incrementally beginning to harden into something else. Not fear, not grief. Purpose. Before I show you what Victor found inside Ethan's financial records, if you are still here with me, drop the number 8 in the comments right now. Just the number. That is all I need to know you have not left. Because what comes next is the kind of thing that makes you question everyone you have ever trusted with your money or your heart. A gentle note: portions of this story include fictional elements crafted to carry a deeper truth. If that is not what you came for, no judgment. But if you are staying, you will want to see what happens next. I had built things for 38 years. Bridges, parking structures, residential towers, the kind of infrastructure that people use every day without thinking about what holds it up. The most important skill I had developed in that time was not reading blueprints. It was reading the gap between what a blueprint claimed and what the underlying structure could actually support. Victor's presentation screen showed me a different kind of blueprint that morning. And the gap between what Ethan Carter claimed to be and what he actually was turned out to be vast enough to drive a freight train through. His firm is called Meridian Capital Advisors, Victor said, clicking to the first slide, a corporate registration document from the California Secretary of State. Registered 18 months ago, no physical office, a rented mailbox in Century City, and a website that lists 5 advisors, none of whom appear in any state licensing database. He's not licensed, I said. Not in California, not anywhere. Victor clicked again. A spreadsheet filled the screen columns of dates, amounts, account numbers. Over the past 14 months, Meridian Capital has received approximately $4.1 million from 43 individual investors. The investors were recruited primarily through personal referrals, friends, colleagues, church connections. He paused. Many of them are retirees. My jaw tightened. I thought about the teacher Rosa had told me about the morning before, and then I thought about the 42 others sitting behind her in that same line. Where did the money go? I asked. Approximately $800,000 was paid back to early investors as fabricated returns, creating the appearance of a profitable fund. Victor's voice remained steady, but his eyes were flat with a contained disgust. The remainder was distributed across 4 shell entities in Delaware and Nevada, then moved through a series of nominee accounts before landing in 2 offshore accounts, one in the Cayman Islands, one in Cyprus, and Ethan's personal expenses. Victor clicked to a bank statement highlighted in yellow. Lease payments on a Mercedes GLE. Rent on a Century City apartment, $14,000 a month. 3 international trips in the past year. A watch purchased in Geneva for $31,000. He looked at me. All of it funded by investor money. Every dollar of the lifestyle your daughter believed he had earned legitimately was stolen. The screen blurred slightly at the edges. I blinked hard, and it came back into focus. She didn't know, I said. My voice came out rougher than I intended. Olivia had no idea what she was living inside of. Nothing in our analysis suggests otherwise, Victor said quietly. She was given an account in her name that Ethan described as a joint savings vehicle. She had no visibility into the source of the funds or their movement. He hesitated, and Victor Hale almost never hesitated. Daniel, there is something else you need to see. He clicked to the final document. It was a wire transfer record dated 4 days ago. The originating account was one of Ethan's Delaware shells. The receiving account was registered to Olivia Brooks Carter. The amount was $230,000. Below it, a second transfer from Olivia's account to an account in the Cayman Islands. The transfer had processed the previous morning. She didn't initiate that second transfer, Victor said. Ethan has signatory access to the joint account. He moved the money himself, using her account as the intermediate step. His voice dropped to something careful and precise. If federal systems flag that Cayman transfer, Before we establish Olivia's victim status, she becomes a subject, not a witness. I stood up from the chair. I walked to the window. 12 floors below Wilshire Boulevard moved with its usual indifferent efficiency, and I pressed one hand against the cold glass and breathed through the fury that was climbing my chest, like something structural giving way, not the loud, explosive kind of failure, but the slow, grinding kind, where the load finally exceeds what the material can bear. Ethan had used my daughter as a financial instrument. He had routed stolen money through her account to put distance between himself and the crime. And if it worked, if no one intervened, Olivia would be the one standing closest to the evidence when federal investigators came looking. I turned back to Victor. My voice, when it came, was very quiet and very controlled. How long do we have? Rosa believes 72 hours before automatic federal flagging, Victor said. After that, the account freeze becomes very difficult to reverse quickly. Then we have 72 hours, I said. Get me Rosa on the phone, right now. I do not remember the drive home from Beverly Hills. I know I took the 110 North because that is the way I always go. And I know I stopped at a red light on Orange Grove long enough for the driver beside me to honk twice before I registered that the light had changed. But the specifics of the 30 minutes between Victor's parking garage and my own driveway exist in my memory as a kind of gray blur, the mind's way of protecting itself when it is already carrying too much. I sat in the driveway and called Rosa before I got out of the car. She picked up on the first ring. I know, she said before I could speak. Victor already called me. I'm working on it. 72 hours, I said. I know, Daniel. I need you to trust me for the next 3 hours while I make some calls. Can you do that? I pressed my free hand against the steering wheel and focused on the pressure of it. Yes, I said. Call me the moment anything changes. Inside, I went to the kitchen and opened the drawer where I kept Michael's index card. I dialed the number for Harrington and Associates and spent 40 minutes on the phone with a probate attorney named Claire Sutton, who had the efficient, no-nonsense delivery of someone who had spent 20 years in California courtrooms and had long since stopped being surprised by human behavior. I explained the situation. She asked precise questions. When I finished, she was quiet for exactly 4 seconds. We can establish innocent owner defense for your daughter under federal statute, she said. But I need documentation of the coercive control dynamic evidence that she acted under undue influence, not independent judgment. Do you have anything like that? I thought about what Olivia had told me, that Ethan reviewed every document before she signed it, that he had once taken her phone for 3 days, because she had called me without telling him first. I'm working on getting it, I said. Work faster, Claire said. 72 hours is not a lot of runway. I hung up and sat at the kitchen table. The house was very quiet. The afternoon light was coming through the window at the low angle it gets in October, laying long gold rectangles across the floor, and I sat in the middle of all that quiet golden light and felt the weight of the last several hours press down on me until my shoulders curved forward under it. For the first time since this had started, I felt something I had not allowed myself to feel. Not anger. Not the cold, focused clarity of a man with a plan. Doubt. What if I was wrong about what Olivia needed? What if I dismantled everything Ethan had built and she never forgave me for it? Not because she still believed in him, but because the life she thought she had chosen was gone, and I was the one who had taken it. A man can be completely right about the facts and still cause damage that does not heal. I knew that from 38 years of engineering, sometimes the most structurally sound solution is also the one that tears down the wall someone has been leaning against. I pressed the heels of my hands against my eyes until I saw shapes behind them. Then the back door opened, and Maggie came in without knocking, the way she had been doing for 27 years. You look terrible, she said, setting a container of soup on the counter. Eat something. Maggie, I also have something for you. She reached into her cardigan pocket and produced a folded piece of paper. 2 weeks ago, a man came to Olivia's house carrying a large box of documents. I noted the time, the date, and the plate number. She set the paper on the table in front of me. Old courthouse instinct. 3 decades of writing everything down. I unfolded the paper. A California plate number written in Maggie's precise, practiced handwriting with the date and time below it. Do you know whose car it was? I asked. No, she said, but I thought maybe someone who handles these things might. I took a photograph of the paper with my phone and sent it to Rosa with a single line. Can you run this plate? Her response came back in 4 minutes. Brandon Mercer, 2019 Audi A6. Registered address in Encino. Daniel, this is the connection we needed between Brandon and the document transfer. I'm calling the U.S. Attorney's Office now. I read the message twice. Then I looked up at Maggie, who was ladling soup into a bowl, with the calm efficiency of a woman who understood that sometimes the most useful thing you can do for a person is feed them. Thank you, I said. She set the bowl in front of me. That's what neighbors are for, she said. Now eat. You're going to need your strength. My phone rang. Rosa. Daniel, she said, and her voice had a different quality than it had carried all day, tighter, faster, the controlled urgency of a person moving quickly towards something. We have 72 hours, and we have Brandon Mercer's plate connecting him to a document transfer at your daughter's house. I need you to find a way to talk to Olivia tonight, without Ethan knowing. Can you do that? I looked at Maggie across the kitchen table. She raised an eyebrow, reading my expression the way she always had, the way Patricia had, the way the women in my life had always been better at than I deserved. I think I know someone who can help, I said. The problem with trying to reach someone who is being monitored is that every obvious channel is also a trap. I could not call Olivia's cell phone. Ethan checked it regularly, and an unexpected call from me on an evening when he had no reason to expect one would raise exactly the kind of suspicion I could not afford to create. I could not go to their apartment in Silver Lake. Ethan worked from home 3 days a week, and this was one of them. I could not send a message through any platform that existed on a device Ethan had access to. What I could do was think about what Ethan could not control. He could not control the fact that Margaret Porter had been baking Patricia's sunflower honey cake every October for 22 years, and that Olivia had grown up eating it at this kitchen table, and that the recipe existed nowhere in writing, because Patricia had kept it entirely in her head and passed it verbally to Maggie and no one else. It was the kind of thing that belonged to the two of them, to the women, to the friendship, to the specific texture of a life that Ethan Carter had not been present for and could not replicate or intercept. Maggie understood immediately when I explained it. I'll call her, she said, already reaching for her phone. I'll tell her I want to pass on the recipe before I forget any of it, that I need her to come over tonight so I can show her in person. She paused, her hand on the phone. Ethan won't question that. He doesn't know what he doesn't know. No, I said. He doesn't. Olivia arrived at Maggie's front door at 7:43 in the evening. I heard her knock 3 quick raps, the same pattern she had used since she was a child. And then Maggie's voice welcoming her in, warm and ordinary. And then footsteps in the hallway. And then the living room door opened, and my daughter walked in and stopped. She was wearing jeans and a gray sweater, and her hair was pulled back in the loose knot she wore when she was at home and not performing for anyone. For a fraction of a second, before her face had time to arrange itself, I saw the raw, unguarded version of her, the version that existed before Ethan had taught her to be careful. And what I saw there made my throat close up so completely I had to swallow twice before I could speak. She looked exhausted. Not the surface exhaustion of a bad night's sleep, but the deep cellular exhaustion of someone who has been performing for a long time and has almost forgotten what it feels like to stop. "Dad." Her voice came out thin and startled. Her hand gripped the doorframe. "Hey, Livy," I said. "I'm sorry to do it this way. Please sit down. I need 5 minutes, and then you can decide what you want to do with what I tell you." She did not sit down immediately. Her eyes moved to Maggie, who was standing quietly near the kitchen doorway, with her hands folded and her expression saying nothing except, "I am here and you are safe." Something in Olivia's face shifted at that, a small release like a knot loosening 1 degree, and she came into the room and sat on the edge of the couch, with her hands pressed flat on her knees like a woman bracing for impact. "Tell me," she said, so I told her. Clearly without anger, without the weight of everything I had felt in the past weeks leaking into my voice. I told her about the Cayman Islands transfer. I told her about the federal flagging window. I told her that her account had been used as an intermediate step in a money laundering structure, and that if we did not establish her status as a victim within 72 hours, now closer to 48, she could be pulled into a federal investigation as a subject. As I spoke, I watched her face move through a sequence of expressions that broke something in my chest with a quiet, irreversible crack. Confusion first, then a focused, frightened attention, then something worse, the dawning recognition of a person who is beginning to connect things they had chosen not to look at too directly, and finding that the picture those connections make is not the one they had been living inside. "The account he said was our savings," she said. Her voice was very careful, like someone walking on ice they are not sure will hold. "He said it was a joint account he set up for our future. He said the transfers going through it were just routine fund movements for his clients." "Olivia," he explained it to me. Her voice cracked on the last word, split open suddenly the way a surface does when the pressure beneath it has been building too long. Her eyes filled, and she pressed her fingers hard against her mouth for a moment. "He sat at the kitchen table, and he explained it to me, and I believed him because you loved him," I said, "and because people who love someone do not spend their days looking for evidence that they are being lied to. That is not a failure, Livy. That is what trust looks like." A tear escaped down her left cheek, and she caught it fast with the back of her hand, angry at it. "What do I need to do? Don't touch the account. Don't mention this conversation to Ethan. Don't change anything about how you behave around him tonight." I leaned forward. "Can you do that?" "Yes." The word came out hard and certain, the first thing she had said all evening that sounded entirely like herself. She stood up to leave, and then she stopped. She reached into the large canvas tote bag she always carried and pulled out a slim black notebook. The cover was plain, and the spine was unmarked. She held it out to me with a steadiness that surprised me because her hand had been shaking 30 seconds ago. "Ethan gave me this 8 months ago," she said. "He told me it was for journaling, that writing down my thoughts every day would help with my anxiety." Her jaw tightened. "He read it, every entry. I found him reading it once, and he said it was because he was worried about me." She pressed the notebook into my hand. "Every conversation I had with you is in there. Every time I mentioned money or the house or what you'd said on the phone." Her voice dropped to something that was almost a whisper, but harder than a whisper, harder and colder and entirely clear. "I already photographed every page and sent it to an email address he doesn't know about. This is the original." I held the notebook. It was lighter than it should have been for something that heavy. "I took it out of the house yesterday," she said. "I told him I was going to Maggie's to return a baking dish." She had planned this. Before I had found a way to reach her, before Maggie had called with the sunflower cake excuse, Olivia had already been moving. Livy, I said. Don't. Her voice broke again, but differently. This time not with grief, but with the specific raw fury of a woman who has understood something she cannot ununderstand. Just tell me it's going to be okay. I stood up and put my arms around my daughter and held on. It's going to be okay, I said into her hair. I promise you, it's going to be okay. Maggie appeared in the doorway with 2 mugs of tea, took one look at us, and quietly set them on the side table and withdrew. 20 minutes later, after Olivia had gone home with steady hands and a plan, I sat in Maggie's living room and looked at the black notebook in my lap. Then I called Rosa. She's on our side, I said, and she brought us something. There is a particular kind of dangerous that comes from believing you have already won. I was not in the room when Ethan Carter made his fatal mistake. I was sitting at my kitchen table the following morning with a cup of coffee and the black notebook open in front of me, reading my daughter's handwriting. The careful school teacher's cursive she had developed in college, and feeling the specific grief of a father who is reading the private record of his child's slow disappearance into someone else's version of her life. But Victor told me everything afterward, reconstructed from the surveillance logs Rosa's team had been running for 72 hours, and I will tell it the way it happened. Ethan woke up that morning in his Century City apartment, feeling by all available evidence completely untouchable. The conservatorship hearing was 32 days away. His psychiatric report was filed. His attorney had confirmed the petition was procedurally sound. His father-in-law was, as far as he knew, a confused and frightened 60-year-old man who had no idea what was coming. The machine was running. All Ethan had to do was not break anything. He broke everything before 9 in the morning. At 8:47, he opened his laptop and logged into the operating account for Meridian Capital Advisors. He initiated a wire transfer, $180,000, from the Meridian account to a holding entity in Nevada. Standard procedure, he likely thought. Routine movement. The kind of transaction he had executed dozens of times. What he did not know was that the Nevada entity's bank account had been flagged by Rosa's team 4 days earlier. Rosa had filed for emergency surveillance authorization with a federal judge the week prior, an expedited request based on the active investor fraud investigation she had been building for 8 months. The order had been granted in 48 hours. Every transaction touching that account was now being captured in real time. The transfer hit the log at 8:49. Rosa's analyst sent her a text message at 8:51. She was already at her desk. At 9:15, Ethan made the second mistake. He opened his email, his business email, the one hosted on a server, his IT vendor managed from an office in Glendale, and wrote a message to Brandon Mercer. The subject line was Thursday. The body of the email contained 11 words: hearing in 32 days. Make sure the Cyprus account is clean by then. He hit send at 9:17. The server in Glendale had been under a federal monitoring order for 6 days. Rosa's team had the email by 9:19. I learned all of this at 11 that morning, when Victor called me, his voice carrying the particular controlled energy of a man who has just watched a situation resolve in his favor and is being careful not to let the relief show too much. He moved money through the Nevada entity this morning, Victor said, and he sent an email to Brandon Mercer through a monitored server. What did the email say? Victor read it to me. 11 words. I set my coffee down on the kitchen table and pressed my hand flat against the wood grain and breathed through the rush of something that was not quite relief and not quite satisfaction, but lived somewhere between the two. The feeling of watching a structure you have been reinforcing finally hold against the load it was designed to resist. He doesn't know, I said. He has no idea, Victor confirmed. As far as Ethan is concerned, this morning was routine. And Brandon, Victor paused. That is the interesting development. Brandon Mercer received that email at 9:17. By 9:45, he had not replied. By 10:30, he had not replied. Rosa tells me that in their previous communications, Brandon typically responds within minutes. Another pause. She believes Brandon is frightened. She believes he has realized that Ethan's email sent through a channel that Brandon likely suspects is compromised has just put Brandon's name on a federal document in connection with an offshore account. I thought about what Michael had said about Brandon. That man knows which way the wind blows before the storm even forms. He's going to run, I said. Or he's going to make a phone call, Victor said. Rosa has people watching both options. After I hung up, I sat in the kitchen for a long time. The black notebook was still open on the table. I closed it carefully and held it in both hands and thought about Olivia driving home last night with steady hands and a plan. Thought about the particular courage it takes to walk back into a situation you now see clearly when you have to keep pretending you don't see it at all. My phone buzzed. A text from Rosa. Brandon Mercer just left his apartment. He's not going to his office. We're following him. Stand by. I looked at the text. Then I looked at the notebook. Then I looked out the window at Patricia's rose bushes in the October morning light. Stand by, Rosa had said. I had spent 60 years learning that the hardest part of any structural project is not the building. It is the waiting after the foundation is poured, after the framework is up, when all you can do is trust that the work you have done will hold. I stood by. Victor called me at 2:17 in the afternoon. I was in the garden when the phone rang, kneeling in the dirt, beside Patricia's rose bushes, with a pair of pruning shears, finally getting to the task I had been postponing for 2 weeks. There is something clarifying about physical work when your mind has been running at full capacity for days. The shears in my hand, the specific resistance of a woody stem, the smell of cut green things in the October air. It had been helping me think. Brandon Mercer just walked into my building, Victor said. I set the shears down on the garden path. He came to you. He's in the lobby right now. He says he wants to talk. A pause. He says he wants to talk before anyone else does. I stood up slowly, brushing dirt from my knees. Let him up, I said, and call Rosa. He had found Victor's name through old partnership agreements from his years at Michael's company, documents Michael had never thought to scrub. It was the one thread Brandon still had, and he pulled it. I stood up slowly, brushing dirt from my knees. Let him up, I said, and call Rosa. What happened next, Victor relayed to me in precise detail that evening, sitting across from me at my kitchen table with his jacket off. For the first time, I could remember a cup of Maggie's coffee in his hands. Brandon Mercer had walked into Victor's office at 2:23 in the afternoon, looking like a man who had spent the morning sitting with a decision he did not want to make and had finally made it. He was 40 years old, heavy-set, with the kind of tan that comes from weekends on a boat rather than genuine outdoor living. His hands, Victor noted, were not entirely steady. He sat down across from Victor without being invited to. I need a deal, he said. Full immunity, no charges, no record, no cooperation agreement that gets leaked to Ethan's people. In exchange, I give you everything, every email, every meeting, every document, every conversation, going back 3 years. Victor had looked at him for a long moment. You understand that I am not the person who can offer you that. I know. Brandon's jaw tightened. But you're the person who can get me to the person who can. And I need to move fast, because Ethan is going to figure out I'm not answering his messages very soon, and when he does, he's going to start cleaning house. He leaned forward. I've seen him clean house before. I don't want to be the thing he cleans. Victor called Rosa. Rosa called Assistant U.S. Attorney James Vance at the Central District of California. Vance had been building a parallel federal case against Ethan's network for 4 months and had been waiting for exactly this kind of break. He cleared his afternoon and drove to Victor's office himself, which Victor said was the clearest possible signal of how seriously the U.S. Attorney's Office was taking what Brandon had to offer. The conversation that followed lasted 3 hours. Brandon told them everything. He told them about the night 4 years ago when he had realized Michael's estate was larger than anyone on the outside knew, and how he had filed that information away with the quiet, careful patience of a man who understood that useful information becomes more valuable the longer you hold it. He told them about meeting Ethan at a private investment dinner in West Hollywood, 14 months before Michael's death, and recognizing in Ethan a particular kind of hunger that matched the particular kind of information Brandon was holding. He told them about the Santa Monica charity benefit, the Literacy Foundation event that Olivia attended every year, and how Ethan had spent 2 weeks studying her social media, her school's website, her public schedule before walking through those doors. He told them that Ethan had described Olivia in Brandon's presence as the cleanest access point I've ever found. When Victor repeated that phrase to me at my kitchen table, something happened in my chest that I do not have a precise word for. It was not anger. Anger was too simple, too hot for what I felt. It was colder than anger. It was the feeling of understanding completely and finally exactly what your daughter was worth to the man she had married, expressed in the language of someone who had never once seen her as a person. I pressed my hand flat on the table and breathed through it. "Is Park going to move forward?" I asked. "Park called a federal judge at 6 this evening," Victor said. The arrest warrant was signed at 7:43. He reached into his jacket and placed a single sheet of paper on the table between us, a copy of the warrant, Ethan's full name printed in the language of federal authority. "The warrant will be executed at the conservatorship hearing. Rosa wants Ethan to walk into that courtroom believing he has already won. She wants him comfortable and unprepared and surrounded by witnesses." I looked at the warrant, at Ethan's name, at the specific formal weight of a document that represented years of careful work by people who believed that what had happened to 11 retirees in Los Angeles and to my daughter, and very nearly to me, was worth the full force of the law. "What about Brandon?" I asked. 3 years probation, 5 years supervised release, full cooperation agreement." Victor picked up his coffee. "No prison time provided his testimony holds at trial. Vance drove a hard bargain, but Brandon had enough to justify the terms." He looked at me over the rim of the cup. "Michael always said that man had an instinct for self-preservation above all else." "Michael was right about most things," I said. Maggie appeared in the kitchen doorway with a plate of sliced apple cake. The ordinary grounding presence she had been providing all week showing up at the precise moments when the weight of everything threatened to become too abstract to carry. "The hearing is tomorrow," Victor said. "I know," I said. "Rosa wants you there at 9. She wants you to present your own case. She believes the conservatorship judge needs to hear it from you directly." He paused. "I agree with her." I looked at the arrest warrant on the table. Then I looked at the black notebook sitting on the counter where I had left it that morning after reading Olivia's handwriting until I could not read any more without my eyes going wrong. Tomorrow. "I'll be there," I said. Before I tell you what happened when those courtroom doors opened, drop the number 14 in the comments. Room 14. That is where everything ended for Ethan Carter, and everything began again for me. I want to see your name beside that number before I go any further. Note portions of this story are fictional, shaped to serve the message. The names and settings may not be exact, but the feeling of finally being believed, that part belongs to everyone who has ever needed it. The Stanley Mosque Courthouse on Spring Street in downtown Los Angeles is 11 stories of mid-century government architecture, the kind of building that was designed to project the weight and permanence of the law, rather than its warmth. I had driven past it hundreds of times over the years, without ever having a reason to go inside. I stood on the sidewalk at 8:37 in the morning and looked up at it. In 38 years of structural engineering, I had walked into construction sites in every condition imaginable, in the rain, in the heat. After collapses, after fires, during labor disputes and budget crises and inspections gone badly wrong. I had learned early that the way you enter a space sets the terms for everything that follows. You walk in like you belong there, or you spend the entire time apologizing for your presence. I straightened my jacket, picked up my briefcase, and walked through the front doors like I had built the place myself. Rosa had texted me at 6 that morning. "Warrant is confirmed and active. My team will be in position by 8:45. You will not see us until it is time. Go in, sit down, and let the hearing begin. Trust the work we have done." I had read the message twice and then set my phone face down on the nightstand and gotten dressed. The elevator to the 14th floor was slow and smelled of recycled air and the particular institutional quiet of a building where serious things happen every day. I wrote it up alone, watching the numbers change, and thought about Michael, about the index card in his handwriting, about the letter that had begun, "If you are reading this, it means you made it through." I was making it through. Courtroom 14B was at the end of a long corridor, with windows on one side that looked out over the city. I pushed open the heavy door and stepped inside. The room was smaller than I had expected. 2 counsel tables faced a raised bench with rows of gallery seating behind a wooden bar. The overhead lights were the flat, unsparing fluorescent kind that reveal everything. The quality of a suit, the tension in a jaw, the particular pallor of a man who has not been sleeping well. Ethan Carter was already there. He was sitting at the petitioner's table with 2 attorneys flanking him, his posture easy and open, his suit the color of charcoal, his hair in the careful order of a man who had given himself plenty of time this morning. He was reviewing documents with the relaxed attention of someone going through a formality. As I came through the door, he looked up. The look lasted perhaps 2 seconds. Then a slow, deliberate smile spread across his face, the kind that is meant to be seen, meant to communicate ease and confidence and the absolute certainty of outcome. I nodded at him the way you nod at someone you have just passed on the street, and took my seat at the respondent's table. Claire Sutton was already there, her files organized with the precise efficiency of someone who had prepared for every contingency. She leaned close and said very quietly, "He has no idea. You can see it in how he's sitting." She paused. "Good." I looked at Olivia. She was in the 3rd row of the gallery, not at Ethan's table, not beside me, but in the middle, alone, in a dark blue dress I recognized as the one she wore for parent-teacher conferences. Her hands were folded in her lap, and her eyes were on the front of the room, and her face had the careful stillness of someone who is holding a very great deal together by force of will. The black notebook was in her bag. I could see the corner of it. She did not look at Ethan. He had not seemed to notice. At 9:02, the bailiff called the room to order. At 9:03, the door behind the bench opened and Judge Patricia Coleman walked in. She was in her late 50s with silver hair cut short and reading glasses on a chain around her neck, and the bearing of someone who had been the most competent person in most rooms for a very long time and had stopped needing anyone to confirm it. She took her seat, settled her glasses on her nose, and opened the file in front of her with the brisk efficiency of a person with a full docket and no patience for theater. "In the matter of this petition for conservatorship of the estate of Daniel Edward Brooks," she said, reading from the file without looking up, "Petitioner is represented by counsel. Respondent is represented by counsel." She looked up. "We'll begin with the petitioner's presentation. Counsel." Ethan's lead attorney, a man named Fowler, silver-haired and expensive-looking, rose with the comfortable authority of someone accustomed to speaking in these rooms. He began with the medical documentation. Dr. Thal's psychiatric evaluation, which described a pattern of cognitive irregularities, lapses in financial judgment, increasing confusion in interpersonal communication. He cited 3 third-party declarations. He spoke in the measured, sympathetic language of a man performing deep concern for the welfare of a vulnerable older adult. Ethan watched from his seat, with his hands loosely clasped on the table, nodding occasionally the picture of a devoted son-in-law whose only wish was to protect his wife's father from the consequences of his own decline. I watched Ethan watch his attorney and felt nothing in particular. Not anger, not contempt. The particular emotional flatness of a man who has moved past feeling and arrived at something colder and more useful, the complete unambiguous clarity of someone who knows exactly what is about to happen and is simply waiting for the correct moment. Fowler concluded at 9:31. Judge Coleman looked at our table. Respondent's counsel, Claire Sutton, rose. She buttoned her jacket with one precise motion and looked at the judge with the direct, unhurried confidence of a woman who had been waiting for this exact moment. "Your Honor," she said, "we are not here to rebut a psychiatric report." A small shift in the room. The quality of the air changed the way it changes on a job site when someone says something that makes everyone stop what they are doing. "We are here," Claire continued, her voice carrying clearly to every corner of the room, "to present evidence of federal crimes." Ethan's hands, loosely clasped on the table, went very still. Fowler was on his feet immediately. "Your Honor, I must object to any characterization." "Sit down, Mr. Fowler," Judge Coleman said, without raising her voice. The tone carried the absolute authority of someone who does not need volume to be heard. Fowler sat. "I would like to hear what Respondent's counsel has to say." She looked at Claire. "Continue." Claire turned to me. "Mr. Brooks," she said, "please proceed." I stood up. I had spent 38 years presenting structural assessments to engineers, contractors, city inspectors, and insurance adjusters. I had delivered bad news in boardrooms and good news on construction sites and everything in between. The skill I had learned early was not in the words themselves. It was in the architecture of the argument, the sequence, the load-bearing points, the way each element supported the next, until the whole thing stood on its own, without requiring anyone to take anything on faith. I looked at Judge Coleman. "Your Honor," I said, "my name is Daniel Edward Brooks. I am a retired structural engineer. I have lived in Pasadena for 31 years. I manage my own finances, maintain my own property, and have never in my life been evaluated by a psychiatrist, privately retained, or otherwise for cognitive impairment of any kind." I turned to the projection screen that Claire's assistant had set up at the side of the room. "I would like to show the court 5 things," I said, "in order." The first document appeared on the screen, a corporate registration from the California Secretary of State. "Meridian Capital Advisors," I said. "The investment firm my son-in-law operates. It has no physical office, no licensed advisors, and has never filed a single regulatory disclosure with the California Department of Financial Protection and Innovation. It has, however, received $4.1 million from 43 individual investors over the past 14 months. I looked at the judge. The majority of those investors are retirees. Several of them are members of churches in the Los Angeles area. All of them were told their money was in a conservative, low-risk fund. All of them received fabricated quarterly statements showing steady returns. I paused. None of them have received a single dollar back. A sound moved through the gallery, not loud, barely a murmur, but the kind that carries weight. The second document appeared. Email headers, timestamps, a thread between 2 addresses. This is correspondence between Ethan Carter and Brandon Mercer, I said. Mr. Mercer is a former employee of my late brother Michael's logistics company. These emails established that Mr. Carter and Mr. Mercer coordinated the identification of my daughter as a means of accessing my family's estate. The most recent email in this thread, sent yesterday morning at 9:17 from Mr. Carter's business account, instructs Mr. Mercer to ensure that an offshore account in Cyprus is, quote, clean by the date of this hearing. Fowler was on his feet. Your Honor. Sit down, Mr. Fowler. Judge Coleman did not look up from the document on her screen. I'll tell you when it's your turn. Fowler sat. His face had gone a particular shade of gray. The third document. A psychiatric report cover page highlighted in yellow. This is the evaluation submitted in support of this petition, I said. It was prepared by Dr. Raymond Thal of Encino. Dr. Thal charged $3,000 for this report. He has never met me. He has never spoken to me. He has never been in the same room as me. I looked at the judge. The evaluation was based entirely on written statements provided by third parties, statements we believe were either fabricated or solicited under false pretenses. We have submitted a formal complaint to the California Board of Psychology, which will be conducting its own review. The fourth document, a wire transfer record, 2 lines. On the morning of the day before yesterday, I said $230,000 moved from a Meridian Capital operating account into a bank account registered to my daughter, Olivia Brooks Carter. From there, the funds were transferred to an account in the Cayman Islands. My daughter did not initiate either transfer. Her husband has signatory access to the joint account and executed both movements himself. I stopped. My daughter did not know the source of those funds. She did not know their destination. She has been cooperating fully with federal investigators since she was made aware of the situation, and the U.S. Attorney's Office has confirmed her status as a victim, not a subject of this scheme. I heard a sound from the third row. I did not look at Olivia directly. I could not afford to look at her directly and maintain the steadiness I needed, so I kept my eyes on the judge and let whatever was happening in the third row happen. The fifth document, a sworn declaration, 15 pages signed and notarized. This is the complete testimony of Brandon Mercer, executed yesterday afternoon in the presence of Assistant U.S. Attorney James Vance of the Central District of California. Mr. Mercer has entered into a cooperation agreement with the federal government. His testimony covers the full scope of the scheme, its origin, its structure, its targets, and the specific steps taken to use my daughter's trust in her husband as a mechanism for accessing my family's estate. I clicked to the last highlighted page. One paragraph. I read it without looking up. Mr. Mercer states, and I quote, "Ethan told me she was the cleanest access point he had ever found. He said that once he had her, getting to the money would be a matter of patience." The courtroom was so quiet, I could hear the ventilation system in the ceiling. I looked up from the document. I looked at Ethan Carter. He was staring at the screen. The charcoal suit, the careful hair, the practiced ease, all of it was still physically present, but whatever had been animating it from the inside had gone somewhere else. His face had the specific blankness of a man whose internal model of the situation has just been destroyed and whose brain has not yet produced a replacement. Then something moved behind his eyes, something calculating and desperate, arriving late and knowing it. He turned to Fowler. Fowler was studying the table. Then Ethan turned to Judge Coleman. Then, and I watched this happen with the detached precision of an engineer observing a load-bearing element. Reach its failure point, he turned to look at me. Brandon set me up. His voice came out rougher than he intended, stripped of the smoothness he had been wearing all morning. You don't understand what actually happened here. Brandon Mercer is the one who designed this. He came to me. He told me about the estate. I was manipulated just like everyone else. The room was very still. I looked at Ethan Carter for a long moment. I thought about Olivia's handwriting in the black notebook. I thought about 11 retirees who had trusted a man with a smooth handshake and a fabricated quarterly statement. I thought about Patricia's rose bushes which needed pruning, and how I had finally gotten to them yesterday morning, while a frightened man was driving across the city to confess. "I know," I said. My voice was quiet and entirely level. "And Mr. Mercer is currently 3 blocks from here, having spent yesterday afternoon telling Assistant U.S. Attorney James Vance everything you just said from his side of the table." I paused. "You have 30 seconds to sit down before the door opens." Ethan opened his mouth. The door at the back of the courtroom opened. Rosa Navarro walked in with 2 federal agents. She was in her dark blazer, her badge visible on her belt, her expression carrying the controlled professional gravity of a person executing a task they have been working toward for 8 months. Behind her, a 3rd agent held a document I recognized from Victor's kitchen table the night before. The arrest warrant. Ethan rose halfway from his chair, then seemed to lose confidence in the action, and stopped suspended in that half-standing position, looking at Rosa, and then at the warrant, and then at me with an expression I will not describe as anything other than what it was, the expression of a man realizing all at once and too late the full dimensions of what he had walked into. "Ethan James Carter," Rosa said, her voice carrying clearly through the silent room. "You are under arrest for federal wire fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy. You have the right to remain silent." The rest of the Miranda warning continued. Fowler stood and began speaking at the same time, his voice overlapping Rosa's with the reflexive protest of a man whose client has just been arrested in front of a judge. Judge Coleman raised one hand, and Fowler stopped as abruptly as if a switch had been thrown. The handcuffs clicked. That sound, small metallic final, moved through the courtroom like a struck note, and then dissolved into the specific silence that follows an irreversible thing. The room emptied the way rooms empty, after something significant has happened in them, not all at once, but in stages, people peeling away in ones and twos, speaking quietly or not at all, the ordinary machinery of departure carrying with it the specific weight of what they had just witnessed. Fowler packed his briefcase with the mechanical efficiency of a man running entirely on professional autopilot, his face arranged in the careful blankness of someone who would be spending the rest of his day on the phone, managing consequences he had not anticipated this morning. Judge Coleman had withdrawn to her chambers after issuing a brief formal statement, suspending the conservatorship petition, pending the federal criminal proceedings, and instructing both parties to await further scheduling from the court. Rosa and her team were gone, taking Ethan with them. Claire Sutton touched my arm on her way out. "I'll call you this afternoon," she said. "There are follow-up filings to discuss, but nothing urgent. Today was a good day, Daniel." She squeezed my arm once briefly and left. And then it was just Olivia and me. She was still in the 3rd row. She had not moved during the arrest, had not moved during Judge Coleman's statement, had not moved during the departure of Fowler and his associates, and the various court personnel who had filtered out through the side doors. She sat with her hands in her lap and her eyes on the empty bench at the front of the room. And she was trembling, not violently, not dramatically, but with the fine, continuous tremor of a person whose body has been holding an enormous amount of tension for a very long time, and is only now beginning to release it. I walked down from the counsel table and sat in the 2nd row. One row in front of her turned sideways so I could see her face. "Livy," I said. She turned to look at me. Her eyes were red at the rims, and her mascara had done what mascara does, and she did not seem to care about either of these things, which told me more about where she was than anything she might have said. "I keep thinking," she said, and her voice came out unsteady, cracking at the edges. About the day he asked me to marry him. We were at the Griffith Observatory. It was raining. He had an umbrella, and I didn't, and he held it over me the whole time he was down on one knee, which I thought was— She stopped, pressed her lips together hard. I thought it meant something, about who he was. It might have been calculated, I said carefully. Or it might have been a genuine moment inside a person who was also capable of doing what he did. People are not always entirely one thing. That's a generous interpretation, she said. The words came out with a thin, bitter edge that was not directed at me. I could hear that, but at something larger and harder to name. Maybe, I said, but you don't need to resolve that today. She looked at her hands in her lap. Then she reached into the canvas bag beside her and took out the black notebook. She held it for a moment, just held it, looking at the plain cover, and then she stood up, stepped past the wooden bar at the gallery rail, and walked to the council table where Claire had been sitting. She placed the notebook on the table. I want to give this to whoever needs it, she said. Her voice had steadied. It still had the rough quality of someone who has been crying, but underneath that it was clear and deliberate, the voice of someone who has made a decision and is executing it. Claire said it can be submitted as supplemental evidence for the coercive control documentation. I want it on record. Everything in there. Every conversation he monitored. Every entry he used to track what I was telling you. Her jaw tightened. I want it to mean something. It already does, I said. Claire will make sure it's properly filed. Between the notebook and your cooperation with Vance's office, your status as a victim is fully documented. There is nothing in this case that touches you legally. That is done. Something crossed her face when I said that, a complicated wave of relief and grief, and something that was almost anger, the specific anger of a person who has just been told that a danger has passed and is now fully feeling how afraid they were. She sat down at the council table and covered her face with both hands, and her shoulders shook once hard, the way they do when a person has been holding something for too long, and the holding finally gives way. I got up from the gallery. I walked to the table and sat down beside her. I did not say anything. I put my hand on her shoulder and left it there. She cried for about 2 minutes. Not quietly real crying, the kind that takes your breath in irregular intervals and sounds nothing like the dignified weeping that happens in films. The kind that is honest and ugly and entirely human. Then she took a long breath and lowered her hands and looked at me with her ruined mascara and her red eyes, and said in a voice that was wrecked and clear at the same time, I should have called you back. That day he took my phone. I should have found another way. You found a way when you needed to, I said. You took the notebook out of that house before any of us asked you to. You figured out the email account. You walked into Maggie's living room and you sat down and you listened. I looked at her steadily. Olivia, you were not a bystander in this. You were the person who handed us the peace we needed most. She looked at me for a long moment. The fluorescent lights of courtroom 14B were unsparing and clinical and illuminated everything. The red rims of her eyes, the line her mother's cheekbones made in her face, the particular quality of an expression that exists at the exact boundary between broken and beginning. Dad, she said. Her voice was barely above a whisper. Do you still want to be my dad? My throat locked so completely that I could not have spoken if the building had been on fire. I stood up. I put my arms around my daughter. She grabbed onto the back of my jacket with both hands and held on with the grip of someone who has been out at sea and has just reached something solid. And I held her back with the full strength of a 60-year-old man who has spent the last several weeks being very careful and very controlled and who is now in this empty courtroom in downtown Los Angeles, with the fluorescent lights humming overhead, not being either of those things. "You are always going to be my daughter," I said into her hair. That was never in question, not for a single day. She cried again then, but differently, the second kind of crying, the kind that is not about grief, but about the release of something you have been guarding. I held on. After a while, Maggie's voice appeared in the doorway. She had been waiting in the corridor, because Maggie always knew where she needed to be, and always knew when to stay out of the way. "There is coffee downstairs," she said, "and I found a diner 2 blocks over that does a very respectable Eggs Benedict." She looked at the two of us with the dry, warm expression of someone who has seen a great many things in a long life and knows how to recognize when something is over and something else is beginning. "I think we have all earned a very large breakfast." Olivia laughed, a real laugh, sudden and unguarded, the one that belonged to her and not to anyone else, and the sound of it in that empty courtroom was the best thing I had heard in months. 3 weeks later, Olivia came back to the house on Marengo Street. Not for a reason. Not for a meeting or a filing or a follow-up call with Claire Sutton or any of the dozen administrative threads that had needed untangling in the days after the hearing. She came on a Saturday morning the way she used to come before any of this had happened, with flowers from the farmer's market on Ivar and her old gray cardigan and her hair in the loose knot she wore when she was not performing for anyone. I had been in the garden when I heard her car. I stood up slowly from where I had been kneeling beside the roses and watched her come through the side gate, the same gate she had used since she was 12 years old and too impatient to walk around to the front. She was carrying a paper bag from the Portuguese bakery on Colorado Boulevard, the same bakery I had bought the lemon tart from the day Ethan first came to this house, which felt like it had happened in a different lifetime. She held up the bag when she saw me. "I got the almond croissants," she said, "the ones Mom used to like." My throat tightened in the way it does when something small contains everything. "Come inside," I said. "I'll make coffee." We sat at the kitchen table the way we used to sit her in the chair, with the slightly uneven leg that she had always claimed was her favorite me across from her, with my back to the window. The morning light came in behind me and fell across the table between us, and for a moment, before either of us said anything difficult, it was just two people who loved each other sitting in a kitchen that had seen a great many mornings. Then Olivia wrapped both hands around her coffee mug, looked at the table and said, "Ethan was sentenced on Wednesday." "I know," I said. "Claire called me. 7 years." She said it slowly, like she was still placing the number into the correct category in her mind. "I keep trying to feel something specific about that, and I can't quite get there. Is that wrong?" "No," I said. "I think it means you're processing it honestly instead of deciding in advance how you're supposed to feel." She looked up at me. "How do you feel about it?" I thought about it. I feel like 7 years is an appropriate consequence for what he did to 43 people who trusted him with money they had spent their working lives accumulating. And I feel like it is not enough to give those people back what they lost. Both of those things are true at the same time. Olivia nodded slowly. "Brandon got probation. Brandon gave them what they needed to convict Ethan," I said. "That is how the system works. It is not always satisfying." She was quiet for a moment, genuinely quiet, the thinking kind, not the performing kind. I had learned to tell the difference over the past months, and the difference mattered enormously. "I need to ask you something," she said, "and I need you to answer me honestly, even if you think the honest answer will hurt me." "All right," I said. "Did you ever think about stopping?" She met my eyes directly. "At any point when it was going to cost you something, when it meant going against me, when it would have been easier to let it go, did you consider not doing it?" I looked at my daughter across the table in the morning light. and thought about the kitchen at 11 o'clock at night, with 3 phones on the table, and the doubt that had climbed through me like water rising, the specific fear that I could be right about everything and still cause damage that did not heal. Yes, I said. Once. The night I found out about your account and understood what was at stake for you legally. I sat in this kitchen, and I thought about whether winning this fight would cost me my daughter, and whether that was a trade I was willing to make. I paused. I decided that letting Ethan continue was a worse risk than the possibility that you would be angry at me for stopping him. But I want you to know I felt the weight of that decision. I did not make it lightly. Olivia's eyes had gone bright. She pressed her lips together hard, the way she always did when she was fighting something back, and then she let it go and let the tears come quietly this time, not the wrecked crying of the courtroom, but something more controlled and deliberate. "I'm angry," she said, and her voice shook only slightly. "I want you to know that. Not at you, at myself, for not seeing it, for signing things I didn't read, for letting him make me feel like calling my own father was something I needed to ask permission for." Her jaw tightened. "I am so angry at myself I can barely stand it sometimes." "That anger is appropriate," I said, "and it will be useful to you if you let it teach you something instead of just punishing you." She wiped her face with the sleeve of her gray cardigan. "I start seeing a therapist on Tuesday," she said. "Claire recommended someone who works specifically with people coming out of coercive control situations. I have a lot of work to do." "That is one of the bravest things you have said to me in a long time," I said. She looked at me. "I'm sorry, Dad, for all of it, for the distance, for the things I said that were his words and not mine, for the conservatorship petition with my name on it." Her voice cracked on that last one just fractionally, just enough. "I know sorry doesn't cover the full distance, but I am." I reached across the table and put my hand over hers. "I know you didn't wake up one morning and decide to hurt me," I said. "What happened to you was sophisticated and deliberate and designed by someone who had done it before. You are not stupid for not seeing it immediately. You are human." I paused. "But Olivia, I need you to hear this clearly. Forgiveness is not the same as pretending it didn't happen. We don't go back to where we were before. We go forward to somewhere new, and we build it carefully, and we build it honestly. Can you do that?" She turned her hand under mine and held on. "Yes," she said, "I can do that." Maggie appeared in the back doorway at that precise moment. She had let herself in through the garden gate, as she had been doing for 27 years, and she was carrying a pot of her own coffee because she claimed mine was never strong enough. "I heard there were almond croissants," she said, looking between the two of us with the warm, dry expression of a woman who has seen enough of life to recognize a beginning when she is standing in front of one. Olivia laughed and reached for the paper bag. Outside in the October garden, Patricia's rose bushes were finally properly pruned. The late morning light was doing something particular to the remaining blooms, turning them a shade of amber that did not quite exist at any other time of day. I looked at my daughter, laughing at something Maggie had just said, tearing an almond croissant apart with both hands over the kitchen table she had sat at since she was 6 years old. There was still a great deal to do. Claire had filings. Vance's office had follow-up interviews. There were 43 families somewhere in Los Angeles who had lost money they could not easily recover, and I had been thinking about that, and what I might be able to do about it, and the conversation I needed to have with Victor. But that was for later. Right now, there was coffee and almond croissants and October light and my daughter's laugh in the kitchen of the house on Marengo Street, and that was for this particular Saturday morning exactly enough. The last letter from Michael had been sitting in the bottom of a locked box in my study for 14 months. Not because I had forgotten it was there. I knew exactly where it was. I had moved that box twice since Michael's death, reorganized the shelf around it, sometimes opened the lid and looked at the sealed envelope, and then closed the box again and gone back to whatever I had been doing before. There are things you are not ready to receive until you are, and the timing of readiness does not always cooperate with the calendar. I opened it on a Tuesday morning 4 days after Olivia had come back to the house on Marengo Street, with almond croissants and her gray cardigan and her mother's laugh. The envelope was plain, a standard white rectangle, nothing ceremonial about it. Michael was not a ceremonial man. His name and mine were written on the front in the careful handwriting I had known since we were boys, sharing a bedroom in a house in Fresno that was smaller than my current kitchen. I sat at the table and opened it. Daniel, if you're writing this part, it means the 2 years are up and you made it through whatever came at you. I knew something would. I'm sorry I couldn't be more specific. I didn't leave you $90 million to make you comfortable. You were already comfortable in the ways that matter. I left it because I built something real and I wanted it to go somewhere real, and you are the most real person I have ever known. Do something that lasts. You always knew how to build things that last. I love you, brother. I'm sorry I didn't call more. Michael. I folded the letter and held it in both hands for a long time. Outside the kitchen window, the October garden was settling into its quieter register. The roses going to hips, the light arriving at a lower angle with a different quality of warmth. Then I picked up the phone and called Victor. He answered on the first ring the way he always did. I want to set up a foundation, I said. I want to name it after Michael. A brief pause, the kind that contains something. I was wondering when you'd call about this, Victor said. I've had a draft framework prepared for 6 months. Of course he had. We met in his office 3 days later. Olivia came with me. She had asked the previous Sunday at Maggie's dinner table whether she could be involved in whatever came next. She had framed it carefully, a question, not an assumption, watching my face to see how I received it. That careful awareness was new. It belonged to a person who was learning to ask for things directly, rather than through someone else. Yes, I had said. I think Michael would have liked that. Victor had the conference table set up with the foundation documents laid out in sequence. Olivia sat beside me with a small notebook, her pen moving quickly. The Michael Brooks Foundation, Victor said, will be incorporated as a California Public Benefit Corporation. Initial endowment $65 million from the trust assets structured in 3 program areas. $30 million for the Financial Fraud Recovery Initiative, direct support for victims of investment fraud across Greater Los Angeles. Legal assistance, financial counseling. Emergency funds for people who had lost retirement savings to schemes exactly like Ethan's. 43 families from his case alone. This would cover them and far more. $20 million for the Brooks Technical Scholarship Program, full-ride scholarships for first-generation students pursuing engineering, architecture, and construction at California community colleges and state universities. Michael had always believed the people who build things deserve the same regard as the people who fund them. He was right. $15 million for the Community Financial Literacy Program, free workshops, one-on-one counseling, online resources. Specific curriculum on identifying fraudulent investment schemes. So what happened to those 43 families happens to fewer people going forward. Olivia looked up from her notebook. Her pen had stopped. The literacy program, she said. Can it include a component for people in financially controlling relationships? People who don't have access to their own accounts, who don't know what their household finances actually look like. Something moved in her face, the look of someone drawing on experience they would rather not have but intend to use. Because that is a form of financial vulnerability too, and there are a lot of people sitting in it who don't know that is what it is called. Victor looked at her. Then he made a note. Yes, he said. We can build that in. I watched my daughter turn back to her notebook, her pen moving again with the focused energy of a person who has found a direction. Victor, I said, I want Olivia on the board of directors. She looked up. Her expression was trying very hard not to show how much the question mattered. If she's willing, I added. Olivia set her pen down. She straightened in her chair the way she used to when she was a child and had been asked to do something she took seriously. I'm willing, she said. Clear, steady, entirely her own. I picked up the pen Victor placed in front of me, a plain ballpoint, nothing ceremonial, and signed my name on the Foundation Incorporation document. The ink dried on the paper, and the Michael Brooks Foundation came into existence on a Thursday afternoon in Beverly Hills, in the presence of a wealth manager who had been waiting 6 months and a daughter who was for the first time in 2 years building something of her own. I got home from Beverly Hills at 4:30. The October light was doing what it does in late afternoon in Pasadena, coming in at an angle that turns ordinary things gold, the kind of light that makes the familiar look like a memory even while you are still standing inside it. I parked in the driveway, sat for a moment with my hands on the wheel, and then went around to the back of the house and into the garden. Maggie's sunflowers had grown taller than I expected. She had planted them along the south fence in early spring, 6 of them from seeds she said had come from a packet. Patricia had never gotten around to using, and they had grown all summer while I was looking at other things, and now they stood with their heavy heads tipped slightly toward the last of the afternoon sun, the yellow of them almost unbearably vivid against the October sky. I stood among them for a while and did not think about anything in particular. Then I went inside, made tea, and opened the box. The photograph was at the bottom, beneath the trust documents, and the letters and the administrative pages that Victor had sent over in the months after Michael's death. It was a snapshot slightly overexposed the way photographs from the late 1970s always are: 2 boys standing in front of a small house in Fresno, squinting into the sun. I was 14. Michael was 12. We were wearing the kind of clothes that children wore when nobody had any money, and nobody made a point of it. On the back in handwriting, I did not recognize our mothers. I realized looking at it were 5 words. My boys. They'll be fine. I sat at the kitchen table and held the photograph until the tea went cold. Then the side gate opened, and I heard Olivia's footsteps on the garden path, the same quick, slightly impatient footsteps she had had since she was 12 years old and too eager to walk around to the front. She appeared in the kitchen doorway with sunflowers in her arms. Not from a florist. Cut ones, stems still rough, the kind you pull from a garden. Maggie's, she said, holding them up. She said they were ready. Her eyes went to the photograph on the table. She came in, set the sunflowers in the sink, and sat down across from me. She looked at the photograph for a moment without picking it up. Is that Uncle Michael? She asked. And me, I said. 1978, Fresno. She looked at the 2 boys squinting in the sun. You both look like you're about to get into trouble, she said. We usually were, I said. She smiled. Not the careful smile she had worn for the past 2 years, but the real one. The one that reached her eyes and crinkled the corners and looked exactly like Patricia's. Outside, Maggie was moving along the fence line, doing something with the sunflower stems, cutting them back, probably the way you do after the season turns, so they come back stronger. She was humming something I could not quite make out through the window. Olivia reached across the table and turned the photograph so she could read the back. My boys, she read aloud. They'll be fine. She set it down gently. Her voice, when she spoke again, was quiet and entirely certain. She was right. I looked at my daughter across the kitchen table in the late afternoon light. Yes, I said, she was. If this family story taught me anything, it is this. The people who try to take from you are rarely strangers. They are the ones who learned your name first, who sat at your table, who knew which door you left unlocked. I let pride and loneliness cloud my judgment for too long. I almost lost my daughter not to an enemy, but to my own silence. So let me say it plainly, the way I wish someone had said it to me. Do not wait until the foundation is cracking to inspect the walls. Ask the hard questions early. Read what you sign. And never let someone make you feel that loving your own family requires their permission. I am not a perfect father. I made mistakes I will carry for the rest of my life. But I believe, and I have felt this in ways that go beyond what I can explain, that God puts the right people beside us at exactly the right moment. Maggie at the fence. Victor on the phone. Rosa across a coffee table. None of that was coincidence. This is what Grandpa stories are really about. Not the money, not the courtrooms, the people who stay. If this family story moved you, leave a comment below and tell me yours. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. And if you haven't subscribed yet, this Grandpa Stories channel is the place to be for stories that actually mean something. Thank you for staying until the very end. It means more than you know. A note before our next story, some narratives on this channel contain fictional elements crafted purely to explore real human experiences. If that is not the content you are looking for, no hard feelings. Choose what feeds your soul. But if you are staying, we have so much more to tell.